And tonight we're very excited to have Dr. Christopher DeCock, who is a pediatric neurologist, to present his story of grace. However, it makes me feel a little old just because I can still remember Christopher and his brothers serving Mass up here, and that was back in the day when I was actually taller than they are. But anyway, we have band, bears, brains, and bioethics, how God writes straight with crooked lines. Christopher DeCock will now share his amazing path through twists and turns as God revealed his will for Christopher in his work and life. Please help me welcome Christopher DeCock.
Is this working okay? Everyone here? All right, well, I apologize that you have nothing better to do than to come here and listen to me on a Tuesday night. Hopefully it's entertaining enough that you don't feel like your money's been wasted. However, twice nothing is still nothing, so you get what you pay for. So, as Father Braun said in the homily last Sunday, Peter's story is not unlike our own. As he read in Scripture, "Amen, amen, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to dress yourself and go where you wanted. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." A lot can change in our lives when we give up control and try to do God's will. If you remember from the Baltimore Catechism, I remember when Andrew and I were sitting probably a few rows back over there, and Bishop Sullivan said, "What is the purpose of life?" And without missing a beat, Andrew, not me, I was sitting next to Andrew, said, "It's to love, know, and serve God in this world and be with him in the next." And the bishop looked at him and said, "All right, I'll take your seat. You can go give the rest of the homily." So to love, know, and serve God in this world and to be with him in the next. So how do we do that? And fundamentally, it comes down to a number of small yeses. Sometimes you get hit over the head. Sometimes it's just a faint whisper. But in the end, it's the yes. Just like the Virgin Mary when she said yes to being the Mother of God. Now, this might shock some of you, but I never wanted to be a doctor. I really didn't. I had zero desire to be a physician. When I was younger, in high school, I loved music. I practiced my euphonium, which, by the way, it's a baby tuba, if anyone wonders. It's mistakenly called a baritone. But I proudly wore a t-shirt that said, "Music is life. The rest is just details." And I loved music so much that I left the Catholic school system in order to take more music classes in the public schools. I actually graduated from North. I was in jazz band, 2 concert bands, orchestra, youth symphony, music composition. I attended the International Music Camp. I was an all-state band, and I practiced 4 hours a day in addition to going to school and having a part-time job. In fact, I remember once a young lady asked if I would, go to her house after school and teach her jazz. And much to her chagrin, I went after school and taught her jazz. It was shocking. She actually didn't care about the music. She wanted to spend time with me. In fact, I even received a scholarship for a full ride for music performance at Minot State University. And that might not seem like a big deal, but at the time, head of bands was a former Marine band soloist on the euphonium. And he taught at International Music Camp, and we referred to him as the all-wise youth god. I knew what I wanted. Now, I said earlier, sometimes God is subtle, and sometimes he's more blunt. Before I accepted the scholarship, my mom expressed some trepidation. Now, anyone who knows my mom knows that trepidation is not necessarily something that Nancy DeCock has ever expressed. Being 100% Norwegian and 6 foot tall, it doesn't come across that often. But she was worried about me going off to college. And she asked if I would be willing to instead give up the scholarship and go to NDSU. And if after a year, if I was still interested, maybe then I could go off and accept that scholarship. Now, I'm not a pleaser. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm not a pleaser. And I'm more than just a little bit stubborn. And I don't think anyone here would think I don't know my mind. But for some reason, and I don't know why, I still don't know why, I said yes. I didn't even argue. I gave up my scholarship and I went to NDSU. Now, I entered NDSU and became a zoology major and a minor in music. I figured if I was going to give up the big bucks of a musician, I might as well go for even bigger money and become a forest ranger, because they make a lot of money. Growing up, we never had a lake cabin. We didn't really like amusement parks. We always went to the national parks. And it's a tradition we still do with my kids today. And while I was getting that degree, I was amazed by the amount of time it took to get 1 credit in music in college. And so, unfortunately, the music major or minor quickly disappeared. Part of that was because I wanted to attend daily mass at the Newman Center, and it got in the way of the marching band schedule. And so I picked going to mass with the pretty girls over going to marching band. I excelled in zoology. I was a tutor, I was a teaching assistant, and I was even rewarded a research scholarship. I remember my mom being somewhat shocked and dismayed at dissected animals in her fridge and frozen squirrels in the freezer. People needed things to skin and stuff, and I provided those things. It was a public service. When I got the research scholarship, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. I was going to get to go and work doing behavioral ecology with one of the leading experts on black bears in the world. And he lived and worked in Ely, Minnesota. So it was right in the backyard. So I could easily afford to go up there. I would be following radio-collared bears in the wild and looking at their feeding time budget. Our notion was that we thought, that old adage, a fed bear is a dead bear. Is that really true? If we offer supplemental nutrition to bears in the wild, will they choose that supplemental nutrition, or will they choose their own native foodstuffs? And when I was there, food was there in abundance. It was the height of forest tent caterpillar season, or army worms. It sounded like rain falling, but it wasn't rain. It was those little worms falling, and the bears loved them. Now, shockingly, my mother wasn't nearly as excited as I was about this opportunity to go live with wild animals. I told her, Mom, it's like Jane Goodall, but just with bears. And I was required to navigate by the sun. This was before GPS. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have a gun. I carried a hunting knife with me. The researcher I worked with wasn't Catholic, but he definitely believed in baptism by fire. He showed me how to use the radio collar equipment, took me out, showed me the bears, and left. That was all the training I had. The first time I encountered a bear in the wild was a little bit scary. Now, these are black bears, but they got 300-400 pounds. And what bears will do is when they see you in the wild, they'll sort of stop and make eye contact. And then they'll rush forward about 5 feet away from you. and they'll slap their paws down, and they'll make huffing sounds because they want to see, are you predator or are you prey? Like I said, there was a lot of food around, so it wasn't a big deal. Now, as I said previously, sometimes God whispers, and sometimes he shouts. While I lived with the bears, he hit me over the head. So one day, I was out, and in order to get the bears to sort of, trust us, we offered supplemental nutrition. So, fun fact, bears don't like cashews. Yeah, I can tell because they wouldn't eat the cashews out of my hand. The other thing is they've got long tongues that are very sandy. So one day, I'm out in the field, and I decide, well, I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to put some food in my hand and let the bears eat this food. Now, you guys are like, I know where this is going, and you're probably right. So the bear ate the food, and then when the food was gone, she got a little bit aggressive. She wanted more food, and I didn't have more food. So I at least had half a brain at the moment, and I was like, okay, this is not a good situation. She is over me. I'm going to stand up. And I stood up and backed off. Then she jumped up at me. And I sort of backed off. She ripped my shirt, leaving black and blue marks. The sad part about bears is they don't have retractable claws, so I don't have any permanent scars. And as a boy, I really wish I did. Anyway, she did that, and then she ripped off my hunting knife with her mouth and started chewing on it. Now, I don't know about you, an angry wild animal is a bad thing. An angry wounded wild animal is much worse. And so I reached into her mouth and pulled the knife out. And she didn't like that, so she jumped up at me again. And she sort of attacked my bag, looking for food. And this went on, and gradually I backed off and got out of there. It's amazing when you're in your early 20s. There's a fine line between bravery and stupidity. Shockingly, as a young man, I gleefully jumped over that line. And then I felt mortality for the first time, and I sort of slunk back across that line. I'd always known that one day I'd like to be married and have kids. And when I got home that evening, I thought, it would kind of be unfair if I told my wife when I went to work in the morning, "Hi, honey, I hope I come home tonight." And so, after a few days, I stopped living with the clan of black bears. I needed some group that would be less likely to kill me. So, much to my mother's relief, I went home and did a behavioral ecology project on beagle puppies. So they were being examined by the vets. They were part of the vet tech program. And so I looked at whether or not training them with the procedures that they were going to have to do would make any difference in their response. Spoiler alert, beagles are cute. They're dumb as posts. Training didn't make a difference. Now, I still love bears, but I objected to being their supplemental nutrition. And oddly enough, after I got back, the guy I wanted to do master's work with in behavioral ecology was mauled and eaten in Alaska by grizzly bears. And if you want, there's a movie. It's called Grizzly Man. He's dead. And spoiler alert, he didn't survive. Now, here I sat I was getting a zoology degree in fish and game wildlife. And I was like, I don't think I'm being called to live with black bears or any bears. And oftentimes, since I took a lot of class with the pre-med students, people would say, hey, would you like to go to medicine? You know, you'd be really good in medicine. We think you'd be a good doctor. And they asked me if I were ever interested. And I said, no, medicine's too boring. It's amazing how hubris can blind us. So at the prompting of my classmates, I applied for medical school and had to get a chemistry minor. I still don't like chemistry. I wasn't really sure about this. I thought, well, if worse comes to worse, I could use medical school as a stepping stone to get a PhD in something more interesting. But I also was like, I'm not sure, so I guess I'll apply to the Peace Corps at the same time. I got accepted to medical school first. Now, what's interesting, you'd think, well, okay, you went to NDSU, chances are you're going to go to UND, right? Unfortunately, during my interview for UND, nobody had actually told me about proper interview etiquette for medical school. So when they asked what happened with the bears, I got out of my seat and I reenacted a bear attack. I had done it 1,000 times. People loved it. I mean, heck, you guys loved it. I mean, why wouldn't that be a good idea? And then when they asked what I would do if I didn't get into medical school, I told them the honest answer. I was like, well, I guess I'll get a philosophy degree. All right, that's not the correct answer. The correct answer is I will beat myself until I am worthy to be accepted into medical school, right? We have a good surgery resident over here. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. So my advisor realized this slight kerfuffle that occurred and told me I probably shouldn't do that again. So I applied at St. Louis University, and I didn't leave my chair, and I didn't tell them I would go into philosophy, and I didn't reenact a bear attack, because at UND, my pre-interview rank was 11. After my interview, it dropped to 121. And I actually have the actual interview sheet. I've got the data to prove it, and the comments. Now, what was good for me is at St. Louis University, I became their DEI hire because they had never had anyone apply from North Dakota. They said, wow, where is North Dakota? Is that Mount Rushmore? And yeah, so I became the first North Dakota DEI hire in St. Louis University. Now, I would have liked to have stayed local. I think my parents would have liked it if I would have stayed local. But God had other plans. There was a reason why I had to go to St. Louis. And ultimately, that's where I needed to be. Now, in medical school, shockingly, I actually enjoyed it. And it's funny because a lot of people thought I would never even finish medical school. They were like, he's just that crazy zoology guy who lived with bears. That's not going to happen. I fell in love with neuroanatomy, and so I decided I was going to be a neurologist. But I also fell in love with a girl. But it's not what you think. She was a fellow medical student, and we got engaged. Now, unfortunately, there were a lot of problems. Her family was really messed up. Her father had hit her and stuff like that, was constantly putting her down. He didn't like me. He was a millionaire who had real estate in California and thought that she found me under a rock. In our marriage prep with Monsignor Pins in St. Louis, he told us that we needed marriage counseling. I called it off. I was like, look, we're not even married. This is not the way to a successful marriage. Now, I'm not exactly sure what happened next, but as Monsignor Pins said, he'd never seen anything like it before. She ran out of the rectory screaming, and I followed after to say goodbye, and I've never seen her again. God does right straight with crooked lines. A week or so later, I received a call from an underclassman that I knew. And he said that his brother, who was a seminarian, who had been in the rectory, who had seen her screaming, running out of the rectory, he told Paul, my friend's name, that he should give me a call because things weren't going quite so well for me. Now, he asked me out to dinner so we could talk. Now, I love Paul. He's a pediatric psychiatrist, but he is a space cadet. I meet him for dinner. He forgot his wallet. I paid. It made me feel a little better. It would have been nicer if he would have paid. Less than a month later, he invited me to this get-together with some of the Catholic families because they had had a Catholic school there and a lot of them were all involved. And the only problem was it was on the west side of St. Louis. And I was doing a family medicine rotation on the east side of St. Louis. So as soon as I got done with clinic, I jumped in my 1989 S10 pickup without air conditioning, and I booked it all the way through the St. Louis Metro during rush hour, and I got to the party, and I still had my reflex hammer in my pocket. So I get to this party, and I sit down on a couch, and next to me is this brunette with curly hair. She wore a brown polo shirt and had a jean skirt. She had some cute little leather strappy sandals. And she turns to me and says, "Is that a reflex hammer?" And I said, "Why, yes." She's like, "Well, do my reflexes." So I took my hammer out at a public setting, because who doesn't like hitting on girls? And I swung, and I missed. I didn't hit the tendon. I hit what's called the tibial tuberosity. So it's a bony outcropping on the tibia. Now, this girl had been a soccer player, and so she's had some inflammation of that area. So as soon as I hit, she said, "Ow, you hit my Osgood Schlatter." Now, unfortunately, I'm not very good with names. And so after that get-together, I couldn't remember that girl's name. I just remembered she was a cute girl with the nice legs and the Osgood Schlatter. And shockingly, we started dating, and we got married. We got married in between my intern year and my second year of residency. So in pediatric neurology, you have to do 2 years of child neurology, 1 year of adult neurology, 2 years of child neurology, and then you can do fellowships after that. Now, doing God's will in medicine can sometimes be hard. When we were doing our required adolescent medicine rotation, we were expected to write for contraception. That was standard fare. The American Academy of Pediatrics says that that is the general practice of medicine. I saw many people that were Catholic doing that. I wasn't going to do that. In fact, knowing what could happen, I actually found the part of the catechism, brought it to my supervisors, and said, "I'm not going to do that." So I never wrote for contraception. And since I like poking bears, I actually gave my fellow residents a talk on natural family planning and how effective it was. Then one day, the head of the Department of Adolescent Medicine directly challenged my faith. At the time, I wore a white coat. As a resident, I didn't really feel much like a doctor, and the white coat kind of helped. So I had a crucifix on one lapel and a little anime character on the other. I wanted to keep it equal. And one day, he came up to me, and he was all in a huff and a puff. And he looked at me and pointed at the crucifix and said, "How can you wear that? Christianity has ruined countless lives." And luckily, I wasn't sleep deprived. And then I looked at his wedding band. And I said, "How can you wear that?" He's like, "What?" I said, "That wedding band." I said, "Marriage has ruined lots of people's lives." After that, we got along. And actually, after I was done with adolescent medicine, we could opt out of going to the adolescent medicine clinic. I stayed. Why not? In fact, that little episode garnered some attention among the medical students, the Catholic medical students and stuff like that. And so I had a wonderful opportunity to show them how to do what I did, to not have to check their faith at the door. Now, a few years passed, and despite my interest in doing a 7th year of postgraduate training, my wife decided that we were in enough debt and I should probably get a real job. So we moved back to Fargo. It was actually the best offer around. I started the first epilepsy monitoring unit in the state. I ended up becoming the pediatric clerkship director for the University of North Dakota School of Medicine. And they found out, much to their chagrin, that they had rejected me 11 years ago. Now, one day, while I was looking at films of a patient with a neuroradiologist, so that's a radiologist who specializes in looking at brains, we started talking about bioethics. He was on the ethics committee for the hospital and talked about some philosophy, talked about means and ends, and I'd had a little exposure. There was a priest when we were in residency who was from the Philippines who gave us little Sunday afternoon bioethics lectures. And he asked if I would like to join the ethics committee because they didn't have anyone who worked with kids. And I said, yeah, that would be fantastic. And so I became very involved on that committee. I even went to a weekend with the National Catholic Bioethics Center at University of Mary to learn a little bit more. When I moved from Sanford to Essentia, the chief medical officer there asked if I would be willing to chair the hospital ethics committee. I was floored. I don't have nearly enough gray hair to chair anything. And so I figured I should get some more education. And so I completed a certificate program with the National Catholic Bioethics Center and completed a master's from University of Mary in bioethics. Now, spoiler alert, if you want to do something like that, it's better to do it before you have a full-time job, a wife, and 4 kids. One night, while I was enjoying a nice scotch after book club, this lawyer came up to me. We had been high school classmates at Shanley, and he wanted to know what I knew about brain death. He was like, "You're a neurologist, you must know something about brain death." So I told him I'd look into it. He had been appointed to be part of this committee, this national committee looking at laws. He was a member of the Uniform Law Commission. So it's a group of lawyers that look for places in law where uniformity might be useful. Mostly what they deal with is like interstate commerce. But there was this law passed in 1981 called the Uniform Determination of Death Act. And because To quote Shakespeare, something was rotten in the state of Denmark. The lawyers and the physicians were looking to revise that Uniform Determination of Death Act. So I told my friend what I had found out, that yes, there were some questions, there were some problems with the determination of death. And he asked if I would serve as an observer on this national committee. And he said, let me send you a list of the observers on it. When I looked at the list, I was astounded. These were some of the brightest and the best in bioethics. I was way outside of my league. And I could have said no, but I figured I didn't look for this opportunity. And now I know that there's something wrong. Can I really not do it? So I trusted that God would help me out. Through many years and work with many brilliant, amazing people, luckily we were able to put a halt on changing the Uniform Determination of Death Act. The American Academy of Neurology wanted to loosen the criteria for the determination of death so that we could have more organs to transplant. They wanted to change the standard of death from all dead to mostly dead. And unfortunately, mostly dead only works in The Princess Bride. It took courage to say yes in that situation. Here I am, a pediatric neurologist at a small hospital in North Dakota, having a say on a national committee looking about standards for death. Now, unfortunately, even though we won that battle, we haven't won the war. The American Academy of Neurology released terrible practice guidelines, and unfortunately, I've been kept very busy through teaching, traveling, speaking, and writing. And if you want to know more about that, I'm more than happy to talk to you. Now, a couple more stories before I wrap it up. Not only do we need to have courage when we feel inadequate to do God's will, we also must be humble when we hear His will. Around the time Benedict XVI passed away, there was this quote that was attributed to him, even though I've heard after the fact that maybe he actually didn't say it the way it was quoted. It was, "The world offers us comfort. The trouble is, we're not made for comfort. We're made for greatness." Over the years, a number of my friends have asked if I would take part in Exodus 90. So for those of you who don't know what it is, it's a program of prayer, asceticism, and fellowship. And you do it basically for the 90 days before Easter. You're not allowed to have unnecessary purchases. You can't have snacks. You can't have screen time. You have to get 8 hours of sleep. You gotta, do a holy hour every day. It's very rigorous. 3 years running, Rosie and I are still doing it. And I would highly recommend it. You don't just have to be a boy to do it. Another thing about doing God's will is oftentimes it's the voice of a child who can tell you how things should be. So one day, our third kid, Paul, right there, came up to me and said, "Hey, Dad, can I go see Jesus?" I'm like, "Sure." He's like, so we went to Mass. The next day, he was like, "Hey, can I go again?" We went again. It's amazing how we can find excuses for why we can't do things. And 400 plus days later, Paul has yet to miss a daily Mass. And I go most days that he does. Sometimes I can't because of lectures or seminars or meetings. But I'm able to find the time. And I hope if I can find the time, hopefully you guys can find the time too. Now, Paul's not going to stop. He told me he's going to try to get to 1,000. We have to be humble when we listen for God's word. Now, lastly, while speaking at Notre Dame on a first Saturday, I had my first real experience of our Blessed Mother. I had always referred to her as Our Lady. But that Saturday, I heard her speaking to me, not us. I was meditating upon the Annunciation, and I felt this overwhelming sense of love, like being enwrapped, like a little child wrapped up in love. I felt surrounded by the Blessed Mother's love. After that, I felt ashamed of my sins and my inadequacies. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I felt like I was such a poor instrument to do God's will. Why choose me? Then she said, or at least I think she said, referring to Jesus, she said, "This is my beloved Son. Do what he commands you to do." Like at the wedding feast of Cana, even if we don't know why Jesus asked us to fill up these jars with water when we've run out of wine, we've got to have our faith and do what Jesus commands us to do, even if it doesn't make sense. That day, Mary ceased to be our lady, and she became my lady. I would like to close this talk by reading you an excerpt from a meditation by St. John Henry Newman. I am created to do something or to be something for which no one else has been created. I have a place in God's counsels, in God's world, in which no one else has. Whether I be rich or poor, despised or esteemed by man, God knows me and calls me by name. I have a mission. Somehow, I am necessary for his purposes. I have a part in his great work. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good. I shall do his work. Therefore, I will trust him. Wherever I am, I can never be thrown away. If I am in sickness, my sickness may serve him. In perplexity, my perplexity may serve him. If I am in sorrow, my sorrow may serve him. My sickness or perplexity or sorrow may be necessary causes of some great end, which is quite beyond us. He does nothing in vain. O Lord, I give myself to thee. I trust thee wholly. Deign to fulfill thy high purposes in me, whatever they may be. Work in and through me. Thou art wisdom and thou art love. What can I desire more? I am born to serve thee, to be thine, to be thy instrument. God calls each and every one of us by name. He has given each and every one of us a mission, and he sends us just as we are, with all of our inadequacies, with all of our sinfulness, with all of our unimportance. The world is hungry for truth, and as Catholics, we know the truth. We are all called to go and spread the truth. Like at the Ascension, go therefore to all nations. Go, spread the truth. Do it for Christ, who is our brother and our captain and our king. Thank you.